Okay, so we are, I would say, perfectly on time. And so we can start the next part, the last part of this morning session. I'm going to give the floor to João Ferreira and Fergal from IBM.
Okay.
We're going to talk about what we did in the area of precision aquaculture.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. There's Adriano as well from your group, Roberto, so don't forget that. Yeah, so this session is related to WP1, but of course also to WP4 and WP6 in terms of some of the client-facing platforms that we've been working on. As Roberto said, Fergal is on here, and he'll be speaking about some of the work that IBM did. Also Adriano, who is part of the Unive group, and he will be talking about something called AquaRadar, which I think you've already seen in the video. I just wanted to go through two slides very quickly, which are related to the requirements and to the general sort of outline of the platform. The first one is this one. These are fairly self-evident things, in my opinion. If you want to do precision aquaculture, you need sensors that will supply you with environmental data. That isn't necessarily very useful unless you have other mechanisms also to detect the response from the species that are cultivated. The coupling and interpretation of these two are really the things that are most useful, I think, for farmers. But that in itself is not enough, because it requires also that the platforms that are developed are easy to use and appealing for the farming community. So these are the various layers that you have in a system like this, a distributed information management system. If you start on the left, you see the different species of fish, the farms, the sensors, the response data that I've just referred, and then these various sets of data are collated into data hubs. These are things that live in the cloud, and then there are different types of platforms that can be used to leverage that. And on the right, you see some examples of the kinds of things that you can do, which include the use of satellite remote sensing sensors, but also custom services like growth models and environmental sustainability models. So let me stop there and give the floor to Fergal for the next 6 minutes. I'm sorry, this is a bit of a road race, this one, but here we go.
Great, thanks, Joe. Let me get this. Great, thanks all. I trust this is sharing correctly. So to continue from Zhao's introduction, the key thing I want to do here is acknowledge the huge number of dependencies here, the huge number of people who contributed here. I'm not going to go into names, but the different pilot sites, the different academic partners, it's what enables all this work, and what makes it achieve impact and achieve value for the industry. So this is simply, I like to present this slide simply to give an overview of the diversity of what we are dealing with within GAIN. So it's pilot sites distributed globally, the 4 or 5 different species, different local site-specific conditions, etc. And it guided a lot of our development here as well, in terms of developing solutions that is adaptable and customizable to the different requirements of different farms, different localities, different species, etc. And it's this level of flexibility, I think, that allows the GAIN solutions to have real value and real impact for the industry. This gives an overview of this component of the GAIN service. And in terms of the key objective here, the key thinking that guided a lot of it at the early stage was we wanted to bring the value and impact and disruption of artificial intelligence to the aquaculture industry, and bring the components and innovation that it introduced for other industries to aquaculture. And in many ways, we work backwards from there. And the requirements there will tie back to, we need data, we need big data, we need it consistently, we need it continuously, and we need it at scale. So we introduced the initial data imputation, data services related to that, the pre-processing and curation and storage, etc., and the context extraction of that to allow the user, to allow the models to have visibility of what the data are. And then these are processed with the different machine learning models that I'll go into a bit later. And finally, the dissemination of that to the end user. And the key consideration there is, again, is that customizability, is that flexibility towards the specific needs of end users. Because the reality is farms are different, requirements are different, and any valuable service here has to be flexible to those differences. Starting from the data, this is a body of work from AFBI about developing low-cost sensors for the aquaculture industry, which is, I believe, core for a lot of this. I mean, I remember doing my PhD, and it was around developing numerical models to represent the effects of oyster trestles and mussel droppers. And I remember trying to do field studies and laboratory scale studies of these things, and it is so challenging. But what the approach outlined again with machine learning, with data, is if we can effectively measure, we can learn these relationships rather than trying to explicitly code them, etc. And these type of low code these type of low cost sensors are fundamental here. And we see the individual components of it here, which for reasons you probably understand, I'm not going to go into details on the components and the individual components of these sensors. The next step then is the processing of these data from observations towards forecast. So I'm not going to go into detail on this, but on the bottom left here, you see the variety of entities or sensor data that we have, and each different symbol represents a different entity. And connected to that is a different machine learning model that is doing the translation from an observation to a forecast for each of these independent entities. We developed that further then for salmon cage farms and relate the effects of environmental conditions on operations on farm. So this is a recent paper that we did with a number of the GAIN partners around with information on the operational welfare on farms. How can we extract insight there from the environmental conditions, and how can we better inform farms and stakeholders about the role of the environment on those operational conditions, and allow for better decision based on those. These are some of the results that allowed this detailed feature interrogation analysis of those. And the key thing then that I like to finish on is the generalizability of the approach. So we're taking a very similar framework here and applying to shellfish site farm closures in Portugal and Northern Ireland. And the framework is the same here as the one presented previously. What changes is the data that we are relying on, and it allows us for a completely generalizable solution. And further details here in our paper and in our GitHub that allows you to look it up and redo pretty much everything that we did in this paper, and from an introductory to the final analysis. And that's it, Joe. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you so much. Can you get the screen share off so we can get Eduardo, Adrian one? Adrian, I'm sorry, even more difficult. You've got only 4 minutes.
Ok. Allora.
Will F5 put you in presentation mode?
So fast.
I think we'll have to start going through it. Otherwise, we're just not going to make time, even if it's looking like this. We can see the slides.
Okay. Mateo? Okay.
All right.
For that, okay. So our platform, which is called Aquaradar, it's specifically focused on land-based aquaculture, and it has these 4 components, which I will be explaining in the following 4 slides. So starting with the real-time data visualization, here we have an example for dissolved oxygen into a raceway. The raceway is 200 meters long, so in this specific case, it's relevant to have information on the. Here we have half of the raceway, and finally in the outlet. So we can, with this simple figure, visualize the decay of oxygen along the streamwise direction of the raceway. And the platform is user-friendly, and you can choose, in this specific case, which tank or which raceway will be focused on for seeing the data. It's allows the real-time or near real-time visualization of data as it is taken from the sensors installed into this raceway. Again, talking about dissolved oxygen, but on a higher level, apart from observing data from sensors, we have developed model-based transformations, which allows us to forecast based on data temperature, feed consumption by fish respiration, as well as reaeration, and also the supply of oxygen via oxygen introduced from a liquid oxygen. We can compare both the data given by the sensor and given by the model. In this specific case, the first half, the fishes are in a fasting stage, whereas in the second half, they are in the feeding state, which is a little bit more complex, but our results are quite promising. On a different front, we have the feed optimization, which we have 3 ways to detect the fish weights a long time. The first one is model-based, using the bioenergetic model. The second one is the biomass daily, which is a frame which is installed into the raceway. And this frame is equipped with sensors which detect fishes passing through it and estimate the fish weights. And finally, the traditional manual samples, which are taken roughly every month by simply weighting fishes. In this into a wider perspective, we have the digital twin, which can be understood simply as a virtual digital counterpart of a physical object, which allows real-time and remote management. And into its highest level, autonomous, would envisage that the controls are executed autonomously. In this specific farm, the most promising application would be a smart control of oxygen with automatic valves, which would automatically adjust to the demand. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you take it off share?
Yes.
Thank you very much. So this is the last part of the of this session. I just want to show you. Can you see my screen? Somebody give me a thumbs up.
Yes.
Yeah. Cheers. So this is the AquaSense platform. You heard about it on the video a little bit already, but this is a live demo of it, so it's a little bit different. We have all the gain farms apart from the carp farm at the moment on the platform. You can see them there. During the legacy program, we're going to also work with our Polish colleagues to do that. It's difficult to implement these kinds of things when they come to the stage where they need to be useful for different companies. So what I'm going to do is just show you, again, a very fast view of this, just to give you some idea of what it does. I am on as administrator, so I can kind of see everything. These are the companies that are on there. Some of these companies are part of the affiliate farm program. One of them is Doma. They grow oysters and mussels in Northern Ireland. I'll just zoom in on there and show you where they are. So it's a place called Dundrum Bay. And they and the Horticultura Leonardi that Roberto mentioned, that was also in the video, are members of the affiliate farm program. They're not directly linked to the project. You can't do this kind of thing for farms in different countries and for farmers without having some kind of multilingual capability. At the moment, we've got 3 languages on it. We'll be extending that to a number of other European languages and also to Chinese. And so this gives you an overview of the various farms that are on there. This is another of the farms that was already mentioned, or companies rather. Each company then has associated various farms. This is, for instance, for Libesh, the Coolmerex group, which in turn belongs to Cook and some of their farms. And these farms, the companies and farms can define users that then are allowed to go in and work with the modeling side of this, which is what I'm about to show you. So this is the modeling component. What we do here, in essence, is to define a period of time which is associated with the data for which we have sensors. These little handles on either side will let us pull this in or pull it out depending on what we want, but we can't go beyond that period of time, obviously, because that's what we have data for. And when we do that, then we can run a model, and that will give us some data on let me put this back in English, perhaps. I'll put it in Portuguese just for a bit of fun. So we can run data use data from a particular modeling window and use that to simulate the growth of the animal and some of the sustainability aspects. So we try to make this as easy as possible for users. You've got all the companies up here. You can see them. I'm going to pick up on GIFAS. They were the first ones that were on here. And what you can see on here are data for water temperature, for the biomass. The biomass is coming in at about 5 kilos, which is kind of normal for a 500-day cycle, and the water temperature. And you can see, for instance, if you want to get a bit sciencey about it, although as I said, this is more for the industry, that the feeding and the water temperature are pretty closely associated. But obviously, you're feeding more as the animal's bigger, even if in relative terms for colder water, you're feeding less. When you want to set up, so you can see results in tabular form, and you can see a little link here. You can download these things as a CSV, so that's basically an Excel file. And you can also see a summary of your data. I'll get to that in a minute. If you want to run a model, these are the kinds of things that you need to do. You need to scope out what this period is that you're running it for, and then you need to put in some other data. And the data are of various types. There's data here that are on the individual growth, so what, for instance, is the starting weight. But there's also data on feed prices, on stocking density, and various other aspects, which are key to then scaling this up to a population. So after you've run your model, you need to give it a title. After you've run your model, then you come up with this kind of image that I just show you. I'll just show you a similar thing for oysters. This is for Doma. Let me just add a little parameter in here. This is from the AFB sensors. You can see the chlorophyll there coming in. That's what you're seeing there in yellow, this very noisy curve. And this is the oyster growth. This is starting oysters at sort of a half-grown size. So water temperature and chlorophyll are the other variables. But let me just go back to the fish and show you the last couple of slides on this. Let me just add, for instance, FCR, just so we can have something else on our graphs. Okay, so the typical FCR that you're getting here is ending up at about 1.1, which is typical for a good salmon farm in Norway. And so that you've seen how to run the model. There's an I button here, which has got a series of points about the model itself. I can't seem to scroll down more on my screen because I've got everybody's faces on here. But down here you have the logos for the European Horizon 2020 program and for GAIN. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is this dashboard, which does a synthesis of the results. So some of these are at farm scale, and some are at individual scale, like this one there that gives you the 5 kilo salmon. And below that, you have some graphs that give you some idea of what's going on. So for instance, these are costs. This is how much is spent on feed, and the other part, the orange bar there, is how much is spent on the juveniles. And then some of the stuff that I think interests farmers from an economic point of view. So that's what I wanted to show you with respect to AquaSense. I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to just share one last slide for conclusions for this. Can you see the screen? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Okay.
Yes.
So essentially, it's just wrapping up what we've seen here. That we've got 3 distributed components. As I said, they run across WP1, WP4, and WP6. The first is the IBM one that Fergal showed, dealing with big data, artificial intelligence, and its application to precision aquaculture. You saw some very detailed management tools there by Unive applied to this raceway farm. And then I've just shown you the AquaSense platform. And I think together these will do what I also tried to explain in the video in my Alfred Hitchcock voice, which was that they will help us produce animals that are tasty and nutritious and that meet accepted welfare standards. So I did my best on time, Roberto, but there's no time for questions.
Okay, thank you so much. That was great. But as I said, if people have questions, we will have an half an hour at the end of the morning, or they can put questions on chat that we can, the different speakers can look at and perhaps reply. So we can move to the next speaker. Up to now, we have seen a quite, let's say, quick overview of the results which were obtained in terms of work packages in work package 1 and 2, and something concerning work package 4. Now we are going to have a look, guided by Richard Newton, on the assessment tools that were developed in order to show that the new processes and the new tools that were developed by GAIN can lead to increase the sustainability of the aquaculture industry, which was one of the main goal of the ecological intensification of this sector. So, Richard, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Roberto. I'll just try and share my screen. Can you see that? Is it sharing?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about the sustainability assessment within the GAIN project, and could we measure ecological intensification? So when we started out in GAIN, we were very aware of the types of sustainability assessments which have gone before. Some of them are quite narrow in that they focus just on the farm. Others just use life cycle assessment, which is a lot broader, but also isn't necessarily taking into consideration some of the social and economic issues, and also doesn't give a lot of context behind what's happening within sustainability from an aquaculture perspective. So when we set out, we wanted to include environment, economy, social responsibility within the assessment. And as we're moving forward and looking at One Health perspectives, we also thought it was important to include animal welfare perspectives in this as well. So the assessment was called the EC, and it took into consideration all of these different pillars of sustainability across the industry as far as possible. And this presentation is really more about the process of constructing the EC rather than the kind of many results of sustainability that we were able to measure across the different industries. The EC objectives was this overall measure of sustainability benchmarked against the industry norms, and then where we could, then comparing the different innovations against those that benchmark. not just the environment, but also these other indicators of sustainability as well. So it was a series of sustainability indicators which were underpinned by life cycle assessment and compiled into a single index for each of these different 4 pillars at the end. We were very aware that as well as doing this, we didn't want it to be an academic exercise on its own. We wanted to make it industry relevant as far as possible. And we wanted it to be transferable and comparable between the different systems that we were looking at. As a measure of the trade-off between the environment and the other economic, social, welfare impacts, goes further than just the farm in most cases, and we try to look through the value chain, although it's not always possible for all of the indicators. We wanted to make sure that we were focusing on the different aspects. It was about local impacts, regional and global. And the underlying reason for doing it is because the growing interest from different stakeholders in how they want sustainability to be measured and how that is communicated to different consumers and other stakeholder groups. And also that different value chain actors through the supply chain also want more traceability and transparency about sustainability and where their suppliers are coming from. The EC approach to life cycle assessment and also value chain analysis as the kind of bedrock of how we measured the different sustainability indicators. So for those who don't know, life cycle assessment is a measure of accumulated environmental impacts throughout the supply chain, whereas value chain analysis explores the relationships between different stakeholders within the value chain and the supply chain, and is a measure of the movement of goods and services within that value chain and value. They're quite related, but also at the same time use different methodologies, and they're quite difficult to integrate. So life cycle assessment, it measures impacts throughout the value chain through, for aquaculture, the feed ingredients, feed processing, the on-farm production and processing, distribution, consumption, waste disposal. All of these different parts require different raw materials and lead to harmful emissions along the value chain. And life cycle assessment can total all of these up and then produce that as a single metric at the end for different impacts. Whereas value chain analysis is about understanding different parts of the value chain, how they interact with each other, where are the bottlenecks for growth or eco-intensification, who are the lead firms which are driving this and who have most interest and most affected by it, who drives the innovation, who might not necessarily be most affected but have the power to make these changes. Where's the value added within the value chain? So the first step was to identify the indicators which we could use to measure all of these different impacts. Oh, sorry, that keeps happening. Sorry. So as well as measuring across the different environmental, social and economic and welfare impacts, we also wanted to make sure that the different impacts were specific to aquaculture and not kind of looking at different impacts indicators which were perhaps not so relevant. And we also wanted to make sure that the indicators that we incorporated were realizing the goal of the project, which was about reducing waste and encouraging circular economy aspects. And we also realized that along this journey, we needed to solve the challenges with how we measure and quantify and characterize the different impacts, particularly the social and economic impacts, and make them alignable with the kind of environmental impacts that we're measuring as well. So life cycle assessment impacts, typically what we see are things like global warming potential, which has multiple effects on ecosystems across the world in Arctic and tropics, and has lots of different impacts on society. Things like acid rain production from acidification, which has impacts on vegetation, but also on urban infrastructure. We have eutrophication, which affects the ecosystem balance in aquatic systems. We also have things like ozone depletion potential leading to cell damage and eventually cancer, where you have high levels of depletion. And then we have other categories, such as ones more specific to aquaculture, which we were able to incorporate into methodology, such as fish in, fish out ratios, and then biotic resource use. We were very aware when we started along this journey that the feed was a major contribution to most of the impacts. It's from an environmental perspective, certainly, all of those ones which I mentioned, apart from eutrophication potential, which is more to do with the metabolites from the fish at the farm, but that's also linked to how efficient we feed the fish as well, of course. So we were aware of the different trade-offs, particularly in the most common ingredients which are used in fish feed formulation, particularly looking at the use of marine ingredients for aquafeed, but then also the replacements for those marine ingredients, whether they're plant ingredients or indeed the novel feed ingredients which we were looking at within the project. So particularly looking at marine ingredient substitution, one of the most common ones is the use of soybeans. So a large trade-off is the impacts on aquatic ecosystems versus terrestrial ecosystems. And soy is a major driver of deforestation, as we know, which leads to all sorts of biodiversity impacts, and also impacts on carbon footprint through loss of sequestration and transition to arable land, which releases carbon emissions through the use of fertilizers and tilling, etc. We're also aware that some of the soy that's being used is certified, and through certification, then this can reduce the impacts overall. We're also aware of things like freshwater use and incorporated that within the indicators, particularly from agriculture. And many of the ingredients that are traded globally come from areas which are highly water stressed and extracting a lot more water than is recharged through precipitation. So extracting water from aquifers and then it's not being recharged through precipitation, leading to salinization problems, droughts, and other environmental and public health issues. So that's the environmental indicators, but what about the social and economic indicators? We had to consider the sensitivity of the data, especially economic, that a lot of the kind of commercial industry partners would be unwilling to share that kind of level of sensitive data it would require for this index. A lot of the data is going to be qualitative rather than quantitative, and how we incorporate that within an index similarly to the kind of much more quantitative data that we get within LCA. Are we able to collect it through the value chain? A lot of the LCA data, particularly for the feed ingredients such as soy and other ingredients, comes from literature, but it's not always available at the same level for the socioeconomic indicators that we want to incorporate. So are we able to measure this through the entire value chain? So some of this socioeconomic data is actually still limited to the aquaculture farm and the aquaculture enterprises through processing feed, but not through to the appropriation of the different feed ingredients necessarily. But we're also able to link what we did to the typical farm method that was led by Tuning Institute on economic indicators, so we could complement each other in terms of some of the economic indicators in particular. So some of these social and economic indicators, they're often checklists of performance. So do the enterprises meet a particular quality assurance level? Do they have health management programs in place? Are they certified through some of the major certifiers? And by proxy, does that mean that they're also using a high level of certified feed ingredients such as soy, for example? And do they have good social practices, which these kind of certification schemes also measure? They have employee risk assessment. So all of these different kind of qualitative indicators can be measured by how much of the industry incorporates these different aspects within a checklist. So do 50% of the industry have certification in place? Do 70% have employee risk assessment, etc.? We also wanted to look at things like the amount of the product which is actually going to human food or to animal feed or to other uses from the processor. So we want to make sure that as much as possible of what we are producing is being utilized in the most efficient way to produce the most nutrition for people. We also wanted to look at how diverse the products were, which is an indicator of resilience within the production chain. If you're producing more products, then you're able to satisfy more markets, and therefore you're more resilient to economic shocks. Also, things like welfare standards, looking at slaughter methods, for example. And that leads on to some of the welfare indicators we looked at, which were led by Sonia, also from the University of Stirling. And we wanted to make sure that the indicators were being measured in a quantitative way by a scoring system. We also want to make sure that they are comparable between species and different production systems. Critically, we want to make sure there are non-invasive measures and that they were indicators which were being already measured by the farms themselves. So we weren't asking farms to measure different things for us for the purpose of this index. These were things which they already measured themselves already, and that they were representative of the different domains within what's commonly recognized within animal welfare. So the aspects of the environment, the health, and nutrition, and the behavior of the animals, and also their emotional state, which you can ask Sonia about yourselves. So after this process of looking at the different indicators, then we had a long period of consultation, first of all between ourselves within the project, people on Work Package 4 who are directly working on this index, ourselves and the University of Venice, also Tunin Institute, to come up with a list of indicators which we then presented to all of the partners at workshops. So we were able to then ask the different partners which were engaged with the industry how relevant these different indicators were for the industry, and then to come up with the most relevant and draw up the list of indicators which we were going to use within the index. So we had obviously a lot of environmental indicators as normal, but also we think we had a good number of economic, welfare, and social ones were a little bit more difficult, but also we had quite good representation through the social indicators. A lot of this, the data collection then relied on creating trust with our partners and the industry through those partners. So we had good support through the our partners in GIFAS, Suits, University of Venice, and AFBI, who were able to use their networks to engage with the industry and the wider stakeholders, so that we were able to collect data and to also help prepare and pilot the surveys that we were going to use. And that was able then to broaden the network through their contacts over a long period of time, working with fieldwork within the country. So moving on to some of the results that we got, these is a list of indicators from an environmental perspective of feed production, and you can see then we were able to incorporate some of these other indicators within it. So we were able to use the normal life cycle assessment indicators, but also separate out the energy use into renewables and non-renewables, look at the water use in terms of blue water, which is abstracted water, versus green water, which is precipitation, the land use, basket resource use, fish in, fish out ratios, and how the different ingredients contribute to the industry benchmark for feeds. Similarly, with the farm data, we were able to see the different contributions from the feed, from the production of smolts, and the how much is at the grow out stage. And incorporate, again, these cumulative energy indicators separating renewables and non-renewables. We also looked at how much employment there was, male and female, at different stages. So we could look at gender balance through the industry. We could look at the number of fish in terms of mortality, both at the hatchery stage and at the grow out stage, and also the mass of mortality throughout the production. So after we got all of these indicators together, went through a period of testing the indicators against each other. Don't worry too much about the detail within this graph, but basically it looks at how well the indicators are linked together. So if we make a change within the industry, do all of the indicators change in unison, they all go up at the same rate in parallel, or they go up at different rates, or they go one goes up and one goes down. And the purpose of this is to see whether basically we're double counting within the index, so that we're skewing towards a particular part of sustainability, or whether we're cancelling one out in respect to another. If they're negatively correlated, then one goes up and one goes down, then basically you're cancelling out that perspective. We asked then the stakeholders to give their assessment on how relevant the different indicators were to the index. So this is all the different perspectives of different stakeholders across the industry and what they thought were the most important indicators, so particularly things like byproduct use of energy, etc., within the industry. And we use these to then weight these indicators within the index. This gives you a list of some of the indicators and the scores. We then took the different indicator scores and then characterized them into whether they are poor, borderline, acceptable, or excellent according to different literature data and also expert opinion. And then we could put the different enterprises into each of these different categories and then use the weightings, which are here, to compile them into a final index. This is the final index, how it looks like for Norwegian salmon. And you can see that generally it performs very, very well, particularly environment is good, and overall it's very good across all of the different parts of the index, all the different 4 pillars. However, there tends to be like quite a lot of very, very good performers, but then a few not so good performers within each of the different parts of the index. So the conclusions that can be drawn from this is that we can put together an EC for a wide range of indicators, but there are still some challenges with this. We weren't able to validate the indicator weighting or the threshold values with the industry. This was put together from literature and ourselves, our own opinion. So it would have been better to go back to the industry and then validate these end results with them, but we ran out of time to be able to do that. We would need a better spread of indicators. Still, they're quite dominated by the environment in the end. There weren't so many social indicators, so we need to think about how we incorporate some of those across the entire value chain. How we look at the sample frame and size. We still had quite a small number of participants. We had 8 farms, 2 or 3 processors, and a couple of hatcheries. So we need to think about increasing the sample frame and how we do that and make sure it's representative across the industry. Also, the scope of the indicators in terms of what we're measuring, are they really relevant for the industry? And then being able to apply this index to a much more diverse production system. I presented this for salmon, but salmon is not particularly diverse in terms of how it's produced, whereas other industries such as the Polish carp industry proved to be extremely diverse, and we only had a limited number of farms. So the indicators which come out of that give you a very large range in terms of the results that come out of it, and the interpretation therefore becomes more challenging. So thank you very much. This is just a few of the people which were involved in putting together the index. Yeah, so thank you. I don't think we've got any time for questions anymore. I ran slightly over. I'm sorry about that, Roberto.
Okay, thank you very much. Once again, if there are questions, we can keep them for the final discussion, or people can put them in the chat. So we can continue with Dave, who is going to tell us some of the main, let's say, policy messages that GAIN could deliver, also in perspective, taking into consideration what our project officer said about the Green Deal and aquaculture.
Thank you. Can you see my screen and can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it on full screen? Am I ready to go?
No, the presentation is not in presentation mode.
How do I do that? Okay, let's just
F5.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'm here. I'm charged to talk about, does aquaculture ecological intensification require policy change? A bunch of us have been involved in this, us at Sterling, folk at Longline and Alfred Wegener Institute, and of course ANFACO. So this is a composite presentation from everyone. Let's look at some of the international drivers for policy change. GAIN hasn't happened in a vacuum. We've heard about climate change. We've heard about how we should be moving to donut economics. Eat Lancet informed the debate around how diets have to become both more climate friendly and nutritious, and how indeed blue foods need to be part of the food system. And that led to the Blue Food Assessment this year that actually engaged with the Food Systems Summit that happened in October. So this is all the background. There's lots of aspirations. What about action? How is aquaculture moving to be part of sustainable development goals, and also to fulfill a role within the European Green Deal? So part of the issue is how people perceive the ocean. And of course, that's a tussle at the moment. There's a challenge between narrow and broad approaches to whether we see a sort of conservation-centric approach to the ocean, or the fact that it's part of a broader human system that includes food systems. And there's an almighty fight going on, let's face it, between protagonists who look to a future where oceans are left pretty much intact and we move to a vegan lifestyle. It's been a very fast-moving policy period during GAIN. There's been all sorts of accusations, counter-accusations. The Seaspiracy has had huge reach, 600,000 followers on social media, and that's just the beginning of it, folks. There's something coming out very shortly that follows up Eating Our Way to Extinction. So we're in quite a sort of interesting policy space. And I hope that GAIN, through all the work you've already heard about, is really going to be able to take some heat out and put some light and shine the light on the measurable improvements that are already happening, and that we hope this project will energize. So we're looking for transformative approaches. That relies on interaction with the stakeholders. And by that, we don't just mean those scientists, but all the way down to the plate to consumers. We've got to improve multidimensional literacy and also think about what else is going on in the world, and the fact that there's been a huge shift to flexitarianism and indeed veganism and vegetarianism, with large numbers, particularly of the next generation of policymakers, of people who will eat food, who are actually contributing to that discussion in very active ways. So where do we fit into that? Clearly, we've got to move to forms of production that are more eco-intensive, that are more sustainable. It's worth reflecting on how and who makes policy. It's not just the EU and national governments, it's all sorts of other organizations who contribute to this, and particularly people in the value chain themselves, those choice editors that actually buy products from farmers and processors. They have to understand what eco-intensification means as well. These embryonic policy ideas get magnified by media and by influencers. Not everyone who's making policy wears a suit anymore. And if we look at the sort of trace of how decisions get made, there's a huge range of folk involved in this, and we're well aware of most of them. Let's not forget lobbyists. There's people at the heart of Brussels who push their point of view, which may be ocean conservation, it may be animal welfare, and they're putting a lot of resources into doing that. And what we need is good, cold science that will actually inform these debates as well. And I hope that's what GAIN's been doing. So part of that mantra is really aligning with sustainability approaches for food systems more generally, and thinking about sustainable intensification or ecological intensification. And there's various angles to that. Europe has some of the most intensive and some of the least intensive aquaculture systems in the world, and interest in investing in them really varies. And our understanding of what makes for sustainability is quite different between systems and across the piece. But we've really focused, I think, on trying to look at the bigger species that are important and looking at a range of ways that we can move them, transform them into sustainability. We started off looking at stakeholder priorities, and this was quite limited to one of the most intensive systems, Norwegian salmon, and one of the least intensive systems, Polish carp. And we found some really interesting differences in terms of looking at power and influence around stakeholders, what they see as being the key sustainability issues. Clearly for salmon, it's about feeds, it's about maintaining high health and welfare and technical efficiency, all things that the Norwegian salmon industry is globally renowned for already, and therefore very influential, not just in Europe, but globally in how aquaculture will develop. There's incredible support between private and public sector. These are models that are interesting. Can they translate elsewhere in Europe? That's one of the issues. The Polish carp model is so totally different. It's freshwater, it's low intensity. They're worried about freshwater availability with climate change. They're worried about adequate investment. And frankly, the alignment between power and influence among stakeholders is nothing like what we see in the Norwegian sector. There's plenty to work on there. But what we do see is variability in outcomes not just in terms of the amount of product, as we can see here. There's huge differences with what we see in salmon and carp and mussels, to take three, but also the sort of quality of employment that these sectors stimulate. So although carp has a very low output in terms of per unit full-time equivalent, labor equivalent, how does that compare? Is that employment in a different place that we see with salmon, where we have incredible efficiency of labor use? What about the quality of employment? What about who's being employed? These are things that I think the EAC is going to start reflecting and supporting policymakers understand what aquaculture brings to Europe in all its different facets. But at its heart, of course, GAIN looked at these types of aspects of eco-intensification. We're interested in sustainability in economic terms. We have to understand the legal framework and the consumer acceptance. And the three pillars were feeds, precision, and circularity. To kick off, we had to understand market dynamics, what about trends in production and consumption? What about demand? What about what consumers want in terms of not just price, but credence qualities of these products? And of course, what came out of this was that there's an undersupply in large parts of the market for lots of the species that European consumers like to eat, matched by the exports from usually from within the European landmass, but not within the EU. And yet there's also these surpluses, for particularly in bivalves, and there are policy implications here. Should we be expanding where the demand exceeds supply, for example, or should we just see the EEA as the local market and a joined up local market, for example? And where the products are being produced is where there's most competitive advantage. What about solid policy decisions? We need to have better information on consumption. We usually use in terms of supply apparent consumption, but how is that varying between countries? And of course, this high external dependence in terms of the EU, what does that really reflect? If we take mussels, a high nutritional and low environmental food, that's in surplus. We saw from demand disruptions in the UK, the effects that can have on that sector. What can we do to improve it? Well, there's huge, we think, potential in looking at out-of-shell mussel development through improving and in innovation in processing. That will involve not only private sector, but also how we can engage with social marketing to get across just what a great food this is, so that it's not just patchy parts of the EU that eat lots of mussels, but rather we can make them more popular throughout the group. When we think about feeds, conventional feeds, we need more assurance over sustainable sourcing. Not all soy is the same, for example. When it moves to novel feed ingredients, really how sustainable are compared to other ingredients. We got a flavor of that from Lewis earlier. And how can we link in novel feed development with the circular economy? And just to say, these lovely little fellows, the black soldier fly, lots been talked about them. You can hardly open a trade mag without saying these are the future of aquafeeds. We've looked at them in GAIN, and is this an emperor without clothes? Well, you know, we used data to work out how impactful they were. And you know, 32 kilograms, essentially a pig feed, produced 1 kilogram of larvae. That's where we're at the moment. We've got a long way to go. They're fantastic feeds. They do perform performance, but they're not in any sense more sustainable than many of the conventional feeds. And what we see is that there are trade-offs here that policymakers have to understand between, if we take to the left of this graph, the terrestrial feeds, if you like, and to the right, the aquatic feeds. And we see these rather large footprints for the microalgae at the moment, the BSF larvae, etc., compared to products which are available. And part of this is just down to the energy requirements of producing these, and what a difference it makes if we're using hydropower in Norway to using coal power elsewhere in Europe. So these innovations and these policies don't go unattached to what else is happening in terms of sustainable economies. At the moment, we're talking about sort of rhetoric v reality, really. There's high expectations of these novel feed ingredients to replace conventional fish meal and oils, particularly under the pressure of the scrutiny on how we use the oceans, but that's now shared by feed companies as well as NGOs and politicians. Everyone wants novel feeds. But in general, at the moment, they're high unit cost and low availability. Now, they're going to scale up, and there's examples of where they already are. That will improve competitiveness, but we've got to watch those environmental impacts. And at the moment, there are plenty of byproducts in our food systems, both marine and terrestrial, that are fantastic feeds, as Lewis has shown in his trials. And at the moment, that's almost strange because there's still a low and even declining acceptability of byproduct use in aquafeed ingredients, despite the fact that EU legislation is going in the right direction. There are moves to make sensible decisions about that. And I think there's a bit of a failure of communications going on there to the private sector, to the general public around the safety and environmental benefits of using these byproducts. And I hope the GAIN scientific outputs can be grasped and used in that respect. So moving on, we had a huge focus on precision aquaculture, and developing those approaches wasn't just done at farm level. It was thought through in terms of the whole value chain, from site selection and monitoring through to production, indeed through to the consumer. And this is looking at how we site better, how we predict and manage around hazardous algal blooms, for example, using real-time and predictive monitoring. We've heard some of that stuff from Fergal, but also managing hour by hour, day by day, water quality that affects our productivity. It allows us to report and understand our environmental footprints based around this big data. And it helps us also move into the space of saying, well, with these environmental changes, what's happening to the behavior of the fish? How can we be sure these fish have high welfare? And I think we've really made really great steps to using sensor data to support welfare claims, which is where we're going. It's also a way of making a more productive, high quality workforce, of course, and we shouldn't undermine that. And last but not least, that precision approach has gone all the way through to information, moving that big data all the way through to the consumer who can make a better decision. And that metamorphoses itself in the good fish part of the project, where we've tried to come down to the key elements of what we think consumers need to know about what is a good fish, both farmed and wild. And it's got to be a good experience. It's got to be high nutritionally valuable. It's got to be environmentally sustainable, and it's got to have high welfare. And this part of the GAIN project has really moved this on, making information available in bite-sized chunks, available to consumers at the supermarket through being able to scan QR codes, and a wealth of information under the bonnet for those who want it. So, you know, this is a way that whether you're a journalist, an environmental activist, or just a consumer who's interested in what they eat, here's a way to get that information about what is a very complicated part of the food system. No more so when you're trying to move away from linear development into circularity, and we've embraced that in GAIN. When your outputs become someone else's inputs, that's what the circular economy is all about. And it's really got to be based on scientific and technical evidence. And we've heard some fantastic information this morning about the depth and the breadth of what the GAIN project's done there in terms of the real nitty-gritty of making these aquaculture systems much more around circular solutions. But are they viable in the current regulatory context? And of course, therein lies a lot of the challenge, because they are complicated systems. The byproducts and waste have, as a waste, has always been considered low value. And we put a lot of efforts into valuing them and seeing where they can be used elsewhere, whether it's the flows such as sludges and wastewater, or we're talking about how we make aquafeeds from waste elsewhere in the system. We think that in general, the generic legislation really constrains innovation in this space, and particularly those around category 2 of animal byproducts, especially the use of mortalities, which, as long as we can ensure microbiological safety, really should be used back in the food chain. And we think we need to see legislation change. And we think GAIN scientific evidence supports that, as it does as well with wastewaters and sludge. You know, they're valuable nutrient sources that have been demonstrated to work well and replace chemical fertilizers and other inputs into the broader food system. We've simply got to move the legislation along based on the evidence that GAIN support produced now. And of course, that's really put IMTA in a bit of a holding station because of this limitation around sales of products where they're co-located. So it's really holding us back unless we can update this legislation. And another example is the use of the levels of contaminants in seaweeds, for example. Huge potential there, but we've got to get this legislation updated. And I think, on a note in more broad terms, is that it's all about ecosystem provision. There's lots of landscape aquaculture in Europe that simply, that role's not acknowledged and it's not valued. And we need to take a leaf out of what's happening in terrestrial aquaculture, where the management of these, what are often coastal and freshwater systems by extractive aquaculture, really get some payment to make sure these are viable, sustainable systems. Where are we going with this? Well, we need some urgent policy actions for the aquafeeds in the circular economy. We need the novel feed ingredients need, I think, performance testing in balanced formulated diets. And we've shown the way how to do that in GAIN, but that's got to be, of course, this is not something that happens overnight. It's not a one-off. There are new novel feed ingredients coming out all the time, and the way they're being produced is being improved all the time. But we need to be able to measure, submit them to a sustainability analysis based around LCA using standardized protocols. Conventional feed ingredients are not all the same, so we need to get much sharper recognition of geographic and stock identifications on both terrestrial and aquatic byproduct flows, and relate those to LCA, and to be able to differentiate performance. And sources of energy used in the processing of feed ingredients should be declared, because it makes such a massive difference in the sustainability credentials of them. We need legislation changes to support reuse of byproducts and more integrated food systems. So to finish off, how have we contributed to the EU green priorities, green economy priorities? Well, one of those priorities is protecting our biodiversity and ecosystems. And I think you've heard how precision approaches can allow us to do that, from better siting and monitoring of the productivity of these systems, but improving the efficiency of the inputs as well. Reducing air, water and soil pollution, well, just by improving the nutrient efficiencies going in, and the quality of the expert systems to manage these, both in production and processing. I think we've really shown the way there. Specific examples, for example, how can we reduce selenium inputs and outputs into these systems? towards a circular economy. Well, we were built around the circular economy, and I think we demonstrated how waste and byproducts are actually co-products, and how we just need to push that a little bit, and that will be acknowledged by the broader policy environment here in Europe. Improving waste management. Well, reducing waste through the value chain, of course, is part of using the whole fish or using the whole shellfish. And we've seen numerous examples of that. We now need to put those into use. And ensuring the sustainability of our blue economy and fisheries. Well, I think the GAIN project's really shown how we can contribute to being a good neighbour in the aquatic environments of Europe through blue foods becoming part of a green and nutritious dietary alternative for EU consumers. So I'll finish there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you very much for this very nice talk, which covered really a lot of ground in such a short time span. And thank you very much for pointing out which could be some of the exploitation and the legacy of the project. Maybe we can just go to a close of this session. The last talk will give you an outline of the activities that we organize for transferring the knowledge that was produced by GAIN. We named the work package professional development, and we organized different type of trainings, which of course at the beginning were thought to be in presence, but we had to move them online. Of course, this changed completely the perspective, but even though we lost the opportunity to meet the trainees, on the other hand, we had opportunities to involve people from areas and continents which in general it would have been very difficult to involve otherwise. So there was, let's say, plus and minus in this transition towards the online, let's say, training activities. So I will give the floor to my colleague, I would say friend, Edouard Royer, who has been working with me at Foscari University all along the project to illustrate, together with other colleagues and other partners, what we did in terms of professional development.
Thank you, Roberto. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, yes. Okay.
So I will present briefly an overview of the professional development, the GAIN contribution to the professional development. Our idea within the GAIN project was to work on the capacity building of the project. The objective were to provide training for this new paradigm of aquaculture eco-intensification, or better, to the ecological transition of aquaculture. The other aspect was to enhance the capacity of aquaculture companies to implement the GAIN innovations. And also, the last objective was to provide a solid foundation for further research on aquaculture eco-intensification. So what we thought about was to set up three different kinds of activities. The first one were online free courses that were which thematics were the GAIN four main pillars. The second one was two different professional workshops, one on side stream valorization and novel aquafeeds, and the other novel aquafeeds. And the last activity we thought about was to set up a summer school, the GAIN summer school, in order to prevent the GAIN innovation for the ecological transition of aquaculture. So now I will leave the floor to Dave. We will speak about the first one, which is the online free courses.
Thank you, Eduardo. Now, my screen's playing up in terms of sharing this. Let me just see. Can everyone see anything?
No.
I can't actually, for some reason, I can't manipulate this. Could you share your screen with these slides in it, please, Eduardo? Can't share my screen for some reason. Thank you. So we were responsible for online courses, and I'm giving this on behalf of my colleague John Bostock, who led this work at Stirling. Thank you. So we looked at creating an online accessible platform for independent learning, and we looked at a whole bunch of different ways of doing this. So in the end, we used the UK Open University Open Learn Create platform and worked with partners through the consortium to produce these courses, which are free to access and licensed under the Creative Commons. Thanks. 5 courses altogether. The first being an introduction to the project, and towards the principles really of eco-intensification. We looked at sustainable feeds was one module. We looked at valorization of aquaculture waste. We looked at precision aquaculture, and then a unit on sustainability of aquaculture products in the broad sense. Thank you. And the course design was to focus on a graduate professional level candidate, 1 to 12 hours self-study. They're quite nice to use. The software, I think, was fit for purpose. There's lots of videos, text and diagrams. There's tests, self-tests to check that you're understanding what's going in. And there's a statement of participation and digital badge if you want it on completion. Thank you. Really encourage you to go and look at these. The Precision Aquaculture course gives some interactive tutorials and helps with understanding data manipulation and machine learning, for example. It's relatively easy to navigate through these, by the way, and they're all well connected, I feel. And some really nice videos in the sustainable feed section, going all the way through the process from feed sourcing and their characterizations all the way through to processing and their performance. Thank you, Eduardo. And there's some documentary style videos. So we've managed to reuse and use additional resources that have been developed during GAIN in these and make them available through this, really quite downcast, if you like, in terms of a narrow cast in terms of the people who are interested in these areas of the project. We hope they're going to be used indeed in conventional learning sectors as well. We're certainly going to be using them in Stirling. Thank you, Edouard. And a lot of the material is there in good quality, I think, comprehensive text with all the information people can want, but we try and engage the participants in more active learning through the way the courses have been configured and the amount of video and self-testing content in it. So it's something you can stop and pick up later to suit busy lifestyles of people throughout Europe. Thank you. And this is a type of example of quizzes to help people test their knowledge and test their understanding of the materials. Thank you. And there's your badge. So take one of these courses and get yourself a little qualification from GAIN. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dave, for this nice presentation. And thank you to John, who coordinates much of the work done in this activity. Now I will give the floor to Christian and Louis, so that they will present the activities done within the frame of the professional workshops.
Oh. Hello, everybody. Does everybody see my presentation? So I have.
Yes, but you just have to put it in presenter mode, Christian.
Okay. Yes, yeah, okay. Yes, so I will present together with Louis the online training courses that we did in GAIN. So we basically planned and designed 2 different training courses to promote and to enhance the implementation of the newest technologies that we have developed in GAIN, and also investigated them from a circular economy perspective. So one course was called Capture and Valorization of Aquaculture Side Streams, and was organized from Havbruksparken and Waster in Norway. And the other course was called Novel Aquafeeds, organized by Sparos Portugal. And the target groups were for both courses the aquaculture industry and also associated industry, public administration, and academia. Both courses were intentionally planned as on-site courses. However, due to the COVID-19 situation, we had to change to an online event since traveling was very difficult and it was not plannable for most potential participants to come to Norway or to Portugal. And so first I will talk about the capture and valorization of aquaculture side streams. Some basic information about it. So it was held this summer and directed from Bodø, Norway. We used the platform Zoom, and the whole course was organized. Everything around it was organized by a professional local company here. The focus was value creation and sustainable use of byproducts and side streams from aquaculture. We limited the course to 40 attendees because we wanted to have intensive discussions and a kind of workshop character in this course. We had 32 registered participants from 9 different countries, and more than 50% of the participants were from industry and almost 50 from academia. So we divided the course, we organized the course in 3 modules. Part 1, background, regulations, and technologies. So we found it was very important that all the audience, which came from often from a very diverse background, that they have really good background and solid background information. And then we presented solutions for the capture of aquaculture side streams here, specifically wastewater, but also dead fish. And in part 3, we presented potential valorization pathways for these aquaculture side streams in a circular economy perspective. Regarding the presenting organizations and companies, 50% of the presenting organizations and companies were GAIN members. Another 50% were not from the GAIN consortium. So we also took care to have approximately equal distribution between public research, representatives from public research, and industry and other general audience. So we had, besides research organizations, we had also industry, public administration, and non-governmental organization as presenters there. So after the course, we distributed a feedback survey to the participants, and so basically the participants could evaluate the adequacy of the single modules, and so for part 1 and 2, all participants found it was adequate, and for part 3, 80% found it was adequate. For part 3, we received critics that we provided not enough information on that, and also a little bit too less documentation on that. Further, the participants could evaluate several aspects of the course on a score from 0 to 5. And so general global aspects of the course received a score from 4.7. And the single modules also received scores between 4.5 and 4.6. So the course was very well perceived by the participants. Now we will go to the next course. So Luis, please, it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. So the other course was on novel aquafeeds, as Christian already mentioned, and the focus was on providing training to professionals, both from the industry and also researchers, on novel fish feed formulations that can support the eco-intensification of the European aquaculture. We had what we consider a very good registration number. We had over 300 people registering from 40 different countries. As Roberto mentioned, having it online made the course, this training course or this workshop available to more people in more geographical locations. Next, please, Christian. So the course was structured to evaluate strengths and weaknesses of the different novel ingredients from yeast and bacterial proteins to pups from agro industry, byproducts from aquaculture, etc. And then we also had some presentations on alternative fish feed formulations, and these were based on the results from the GAIN project, a bit more detailed than what I've shown you today, of course. And we also had the support from different European projects in this workshop, and 3 of them, they even presented the results related to novel aquafeeds, the Perform Fish project, Aqua Impact, and MedAid. And we also had very interesting results being presented by an Italian national project, the Sushin project, which also supported this training workshop. And we also had a final section on the novel tools to assess feed performance, where we were trying to make people more familiar to tools such as molecular biomarkers, microbiome analysis, and modeling tools. The speakers in the workshop, we tried to make this as a workshop interactive, and the speakers we had about 30% of the people were from the GAIN project, but we invited a number of people from the industry and from academia to have different perspectives on this topic. Next, please, Christian. If you look at the feedback of the participants, the survey we made at the end of the workshop, we can see that 50% of the participants, they were researchers from the universities or research institutes, 19% they were students, and then we had a bit more than 30% of participants from the industry. So we managed to cover all the target groups, let's say, and all the participants thought that the course was useful or very useful in developing their knowledge on novel feeds for aquaculture. Next. And we also, as we wanted to have an interactive workshop, as I mentioned, we also had some questions on the use of these novel ingredients and these alternative formulations. And actually, I think this is quite interesting. The people thought that the most promising ingredients to contribute to a sustainable, eco-efficient aquaculture, they would be yeast proteins and bacterial biomass proteins, followed by PAPs, so land animal processed proteins, and all the rest, they had relatively low scores. So this is an overview of the training workshop. Thank you. Give it back to you, the word, Christian, and Edward. Maybe Edward.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you, Christian, for this very nice presentation of this very interesting two workshop. And now I will talk to you about the last initiative of the GAIN project that regard the professional developments. With aim was to work on the building capacity, and it's the summer school, the GAIN summer school. So the starting point, let's say the objective of the summer school, was to provide a solid foundation for further research on aquaculture and quantification. So we decided to target master students, young graduates, PhD candidate, and postdoc. The duration that was chosen was to make this summer school on 5 half days with 2 afternoon sessions. And the speakers we involved were mainly GAIN partners and advisors, but also some coordinators of other European projects. The program was in line with the GAIN main pillars. We had the first day session about the contribution of the Horizon program, or the 2020 program, to the eco-intensification of aquaculture, with several presentations from various European projects, and not only European, also from China and from Canada. Then we have one session about precision aquaculture, then circular economy, sustainability, and finally about policies and markets. The audience we had 35 participants with origin from different countries all around the world. And another time, this is surely, as Luis mentioned, the benefits to do some online events. The gender balance was quite good. And regarding the feedback we had quite a good level of satisfaction with 83% of a positive feedback. People found that the lectures were quite informative and that the course contents met their expectations. And if we have a look at the sessions that were mainly enjoyed, we have first the two main sessions most devoted were sustainability and circular economy. Then we had the precision aquaculture, which was sometimes found a bit too technical for the students. And last, the policies and markets, that may be which topic were maybe less common to the public, and they voted it less. We also try to work on the post-dissemination, let's say, of the events. So there's a summer school webpage that is available, and with the recordings of all the lectures that you can look on the web. And that's all for the summer school, and that's all also for the professional developments. Thank you very much for your attention. I would like especially to thank EPC for their support in organizing the summer school and also this meeting. So thanks, Francesca and Mauro.